for what it means going forward and what we can expect out of the greenback. We're joined now by Adam Button, Chief Currency Analyst at ForexLive. Good to see you, Adam.
Hi, Greg.
So the U.S. dollar always fascinates me because there's so many things that can move it. Is it being seen one day as a reserve currency to put your money into and a safety play? Is it about the economy? Is it about the Fed? What is the U.S. dollar about?
I think going into the year, we were worried the whole world was headed to a recession, and U.S. numbers were especially poor, especially in manufacturing. And today, we even saw some manufacturing numbers were good. The trade numbers weren't as big of a drag as we thought. Inventory building wasn't as negative we thought, and GDP was a bit stronger. Now, I think that might be revised away, and the U.S. economy is still sub 3% despite an enormous tax cut, but that's the best in show right now, and that's the story in the currency market.
Now, people often look at these big economic indicators and say, well,
And
this will
it's
sway
probably worth
the
pointing
central
out
bank's
that
position one
WTI
way
is now
or the other,
approaching
but we
its
have a pretty
200
firm
DMA to
sort
the
of
downside at the moment,
firm and patient,
which is set at
we have a firmly
56.65
patient Fed
after
now
having
under
picked up
Jerome
on
Powell.
its
Does he get
downside over
swayed
the
by this
past
back
10
and
or
forth?
15
Yeah, he
minutes
does, and
or
I
so.
think it's nice
Currently
for
trading around
investors to be in this
56,
situation where you can
66 at the
see a
moment.
data point and not
just to
say, and I think
repeat,
that the stock
200
market
DMA,
isn't
that's at
panicking, and
56.65.
everyone looks at it and says, okay, well, this is a little bit better. It's a little bit backwards looking, and the Fed has been very clear that nothing is going to change.
And
And it's
just to
not just Powell,
clarify,
it's an
there doesn't really
extremely
seem to be much of a
homogenous
fundamental
Fed
move
right
behind
now
this
where
at the
they're
moment,
all
but we will
singing from the
keep
same
you
book, and that speaks to his
abreast of
leadership
updates should we
and
see
just a
anything.
good coherent policy, at least right now.
Now, of course, it's the most influential central bank in the world, and not that the Fed tells us what to do on this side of the border, but it's pretty hard, and you know, I've had this conversation before, seeing Governor Poloz get aggressive on rates, that the Fed isn't going to be aggressive on rates. So is the Fed really driving the Western world bus right now when it comes to central bank policy?
Yeah, I think the Bank of Canada would like to close that gap. There's still that small gap, and that's why the Bank of Canada said, okay, we're going to pause, but we still think we're going to hike later. And I think in their mind, that's going to close. Now, I would disagree and say, you know, we're seeing a lot of signs that Canada is a little bit weaker, but the Fed is definitely the benchmark that everything's measured by. They're pulling our mortgage rates up and down, our corporate borrowing rates up and down, and really the whole world. So that's what's going to matter to the big picture.
Now we're going to get a GDP print for our own country tomorrow, and obviously this is something the Bank of Canada will watch. But I feel like lately, when it comes to the currency trade, we're trading off oil again. The relationship comes on, it goes on, it comes off. It feels like it's on right now, the petrocurrency trade.
Yeah, and I think part of that's
Whether
the Bank of
investor
Canada
Landbo
really
has said
stepping
that
out
the
at the same
company could
time
have
and
been more proactive in
evaluating. But
informing
this
the
oil
market
trade
about
is
alleged
very
links
interesting
to
right now because you
Baltic
try
money
to
laundering
find out
scandal.
where the tipping point is. And the tipping point that matters is when people start to
And they
invest
say that
again.
if the results
When oil
of the
companies
external
decide,
investigation
okay, let's
are
drill some
negative,
more
it
wells
would
in
be a
Canada.
breaking point
And if
for
you look
trust
through
in the
earnings,
CEO
or if you
and
look through
could prompt her
commentary over the
departure.
past few months, you know, there is not a lot of optimism there. They left the door open, but it's mostly been, you know what, where we can divert money, we're going to divert it to the United States and drill down there if we have the opportunity. And so maybe they change their mind at 60 in WTI, maybe at 65, maybe it's not even until 70. So we don't really know until we get there. But right now, even at 56, which isn't that bad, you know, compared to where we were last year, there are no signs of rising activity.
I'm interested if the international currency trade is taking any note of the political controversy in Ottawa around SNC-Lavalin. Does that, other than watching the drama of it, because it was very dramatic developments yesterday afternoon, does it change their mind about the Canadian dollar?
Yeah, it's not in the day-to-day, but if you back up and you say, I can invest in any country in the world I want to. Now, I can invest in a Canadian mining company that's doing business in Africa. Now, if they get caught bribing someone, which is pretty typical in certain parts of the world, am I going to get wiped out? You know, as an investor, do I want to take that risk? It's a black swan, but you know, it happens in various companies. Now, if my stock loses 20, 30%, well, maybe that's the cost of business. But if you're going to push it to zero, that is maybe a risk I want to weigh as an investor. And it's not just SNC. It's, you know, pipelines. It's anything that you're trying to get done in this country. It just seems as though it's gotten more difficult, and there's really no push to make it less difficult to do business.
And that demand that correlates to the Canadian dollar. If you're going to buy Canadian assets, then you need Canadian bucks. But if you're not going to buy them, then you don't need the Canadian bucks.
Exactly. And you know, if you look out elsewhere, you need that growth as well. And if you go through what we've seen in earnings even in the last day, same-store sales in Canada have been negative, have been flat in anything that's domestically focused. So you're not getting it from the consumer. Even if you look at bank earnings, well, all the upside was in the U.S. So they are buying up assets in the U.S., investing in the U.S., and wishing they had more assets in the U.S. rather than Canada, whereas the domestic business has been mediocre.
I always love to get your opinion on Brexit and the mess that we have there. We have another meaningful vote being promised, and apparently we're going to escape at least a hard crash for Britain out of the EU.
Right, when that's been the take for the last little bit. The pound has had a very good, couple of weeks, and it's on the basis that, okay, we're either going to get a delay or we're going to get a deal. And worst case scenario is maybe we get another referendum. So there's nothing like the UK crashing out of the EU with no kind of deal that's realistically on the table at this point. There's talk that next week she may spring a meaningful vote early. And maybe if it's close, and then she'll have a little more time to run another one. But in the bigger picture, the pound is in a pretty good spot. If you zoom out and look at it on a long-term basis, I mean, at 133 against the US dollar, I mean, it was 10 years ago, it was at over 2. So there's plenty of blue sky ahead if they can get any kind of coherent solution.
It was great to have you here, Adam. Thanks for joining us
so much.
Adam Button is the Chief Currency Analyst at ForexLive.